My name is Layla. I'm 35 years old, and I live in a small but peaceful apartment on the edge of Portland. I run a tech consultancy now, the kind of thing you don't really see coming from someone like me if you only knew the version of me my family used to believe in, or laugh at. Last week, my cousin got engaged. The family group chat buzzed all day. Photos, emojis, plans for the bridal shower. I hadn't been active in that chat in a while, not since I stopped needing it. But something made me check that afternoon. Maybe I was just curious. Someone had tagged almost everyone, even distant cousins who barely show up to funerals. But not me. Not even a polite copy-paste. Not even an afterthought. Just silence. And right under that silence, someone had replied, with a GIF, I still remember it clearly, of someone holding stacks of fake cash, with the caption, manifesting Layla's net worth, LOL. There was a laughing emoji after it, that's all. A small moment, easy to scroll past if you don't pay attention. But I've learned to pay attention. That one post told me everything I already knew, but had quietly hoped might not be true. That I was still a punchline. Not out loud, of course. Never confrontational, never cruel, just passive, quietly excluded, neatly mocked, and it wasn't the first time. Sometimes the deepest rejections come without anyone saying a single word. Not because they don't know what they're doing, but because they do. Because they've done it before. So I closed the app. No reaction. No anger. Just a kind of quiet confirmation in my chest. I've been building something real, a life with roots, values, freedom. And still, they see me through that same outdated lens, the one they fixed on me when I was just the daydreamer niece, the one who never quite fit in. But here's the thing. The lens is blurry. They never bothered to clean it. I didn't grow up in a family that believed in dreams. Not the kind that stretched too far, at least. In our house, there was an unspoken ceiling above your head. You were allowed to want nice things, but not too nice. You were allowed to be smart, but not in a way that made anyone uncomfortable. Ambition was only acceptable if it stayed within the borders of what my family recognized as practical. My older brother, Kareem, was the golden one. From the moment he showed interest in accounting, something safe, respectable, and easily explained to relatives, he was showered in praise. Every test score, every minor job interview, every weekend course he enrolled in, earned him a celebration. He got a used car the day he turned 18. My mother cried from pride when he passed his CPA exam. I, on the other hand, was the creative one. That's how they said it, like it was a polite way to write me off. I used to sketch app layouts. In my school notebooks, pages filled with ideas I thought were clever, maybe even useful one day. I'd talk about tech startups over dinner, things I'd read online, stories of people who built things from scratch. My dad would smile that tight, dismissive smile and say, "That's nice, Layla, but you know you'll need something solid to fall back on. Maybe look into secretarial work. You're very organized." That sentence landed in my chest like a soft thud. Not violent, not cruel, just enough to make the air feel heavier around me. It was always like that. Not loud disapproval, just quiet, consistent redirection. Kareem's ideas were validated before they left his mouth. Mine were met with silence, or worse, polite corrections. When I was 17, I entered a regional coding competition. I placed second. I still remember holding the certificate in my hand, heart pounding with pride. When I showed it to my mom, she said, "Oh, that's nice. But does that mean you'll stop spending so much time on the computer now?" That was the moment I realized. They didn't dislike me. They just didn't see me, and not seeing someone can be more damaging than rejection. Because rejection at least means you're being acknowledged. But being unseen, that carves out a silence in your identity that takes years to unlearn. In college, I paid my own tuition by working nights, tutoring kids, managing part-time shifts at the bookstore, taking on small freelance tech gigs. I remember building a mobile app for a local bakery. It was clunky, but it worked. They paid me $400 and I cried when I got home. Not because of the money, but because it was the first time someone saw value in something I created. When I told my parents, they smiled, nodded, and moved on to what Kareem's girlfriend was doing that weekend. She was applying to dental school. Everyone was thrilled. The imbalance wasn't just emotional, it was cultural. In our family, women were expected to aim for comfort, not challenge. A good marriage, a decent household, children who behaved well. At weddings. That was the silent goalpost for us. I didn't argue with them. I didn't rebel, not outwardly. I learned to keep my dreams close to my chest, like lit matches I couldn't afford to let anyone blow out. I taught myself to take pride in quiet progress, in things no one clapped for, like fixing bugs in my own code at 2 a.m., or finally understanding a new API, or negotiating with a client who assumed I was just someone's assistant. But deep down, I carried something heavier than drive. I carried the weight of not being enough, in the eyes of people who were supposed to root for me. And it left marks. Not scars exactly, but outlines. Faint shapes of moments when I wanted to be celebrated, but wasn't. When I stood in the wings, waiting for someone to notice that I was working twice as hard, for half the recognition. It was a lonely kind of determination, the kind that grows in silence, the kind that doesn't seek applause because it knows it won't come. And so, over time, I stopped hoping for it. I watched Kareem get a job at one of the big 4 firms, and the family threw a dinner for him, rented a hall even, had customized cupcakes with his firm's logo. I didn't even know we had that kind of budget. When I launched my own freelance consulting business 2 years later, they didn't mention it in the group chat. My mother said, "That's good, but just be careful. Clients can be difficult." That was her version of support. I used to think I was being too sensitive, that maybe I was imagining things. But the more I grew, not just professionally, but emotionally, the more I realized how much I had been minimizing my own pain just to stay connected to them. And eventually, that realization became too loud to ignore, because I wasn't just the quiet dreamer. I was becoming something real, something measurable, something they still refused to see. Not because it wasn't happening, but because it wasn't happening the way they had imagined for me. I became the invisible one. Not the black sheep, not the rebel, just quietly erased. Until I became a whisper in their narrative, a convenient omission. But while they were forgetting me, I was becoming something I never needed them to validate. Something solid. I launched my company on a Wednesday. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no cameras, or applause. Just me, sitting alone at my kitchen table, clicking publish on the final version of the website. I'd worked on it for almost a year, built from the ground up with long nights, a dozen small contracts, and every ounce of energy I had. Left after surviving the corporate jobs that taught me exactly how I didn't want to lead. It was real. My name on the paperwork, my ideas behind every tab and feature. It was finally mine. I texted my family group chat, the same one where baby photos, wedding announcements, and forwarded prayers were shared daily. I kept it short. Launched my business today, feeling nervous but hopeful. Would love your blessings. No one replied that day. Not one message. I told myself they were busy, that it was the middle of the week, that maybe no one had seen it yet. But the next morning, my aunt posted about Kareem's new promotion. He'd been made a senior associate at his firm, a steady, predictable milestone. The thread exploded. Dozens of congratulatory messages, fire emojis. Even my grandmother, who can barely type, sent a voice note. I waited. I told myself maybe my message had been lost in the excitement. Maybe someone would circle back. They never did. That weekend, we all gathered for Kareem's promotion party, a full-blown event at my uncle's house. Tables lined with catered food, printed banners. With his name, people flying in from other states. I showed up partly out of obligation, partly because I still believed someone would acknowledge what I had done. I wore a blue silk blouse I'd saved for a someday moment. It was understated but special. I'd imagined someone asking how my business was going. Maybe my mother, maybe one of my cousins. I'd imagined finally saying out loud that I was proud of something I built. But no one asked. Instead, I stood near the drinks table, pouring myself sparkling water when I heard my uncle, the loud one, retelling an old story. One where I had pitched some app idea at a family dinner years ago. I hadn't realized anyone remembered. He was laughing. She said she was going to make the next Uber. Remember that? What was it? Something about renting umbrellas? A few people chuckled. Even my mother smiled, like she didn't want to be rude but couldn't help herself. It was the kind of laugh people use when they've already decided not to take you seriously. And I stood there, holding a flimsy plastic cup, realizing that, in their minds, I was still that girl with cute ideas and no direction. They hadn't seen me. Not then. Not now. What hurt the most wasn't the joke. It was how small I suddenly felt in a room I had outgrown. They still saw me as the dreamy niece, the one who floated around with odd jobs and passion projects. It didn't matter that I had clients now, that I had contracts pending with companies they'd actually recognize if I said the names out loud, that I was building something sustainable, ethical, and smart. All of that vanished behind their version of me, the version they could mock with comfort. I didn't say anything. I didn't correct the story or defend myself. I just smiled like it didn't sting. But inside, something hardened. On the drive home, I kept the windows down. The night air helped. It reminded me that I was alive, that I was here, that their narrative wasn't the truth. It was just louder than mine. That was the night I stopped expecting validation from people who never gave it willingly. That was the moment I understood. I could be on Forbes next week, and they'd still bring up the time I spilled juice on the carpet at age 10. They needed me to stay small. It made them feel big. And the deeper truth? I had let them. I had made room for that narrative, sat quietly when they laughed, brushed off their silence, softened my wins so they wouldn't feel uncomfortable. I thought I was preserving peace, but really, I was giving up space that belonged to me. Their disbelief didn't just hurt, it had shaped how I saw myself. Every time I hesitated to share a success, every time I downplayed an idea, every time I feared being too much, it was because I'd learned, over and over again, that ambition made people withdraw, especially my people. But that night, after the jokes and the banners and the laughter that never once turned toward me, I made a decision. I would not fight for their attention anymore. I would not explain my choices, justify my hours, or offer proof of my value. My work would speak. And if they couldn't hear it, then it wasn't meant for them. I was 15 the first time I realized I was completely on my own, not physically, but emotionally. It happened on a humid spring afternoon, the kind where the air feels heavy, before a storm, but nothing ever breaks. I had just gotten home from school and was clutching a folder like it held treasure. In a way, it did. My computer science teacher, Mr. Yates, had handed back our midterm project results that morning. I'd stayed up almost 3 nights in a row to finish mine, a basic prototype for a productivity app that helped students organize homework and class notes. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. I coded it myself, tested it, and even designed. A simple interface. I got the highest score in class. At the bottom of the printout, Mr. Yates had written, "Layla, you have a gift. You could really do something with this." It felt like someone had poured sunlight directly into my chest. I walked home in a daze, not from pride exactly, but from the feeling that someone saw me. That this thing I did, this thing I loved, wasn't just a phase or a distraction. I waited for the perfect moment to show my parents. My mother was in the kitchen slicing cucumbers. My father was flipping channels in the living room. I walked in holding the folder, still smiling. I got the yo. Top score on my app project, I said, keeping my tone casual, even though my heart was racing. My mother nodded without looking up. That's nice, she said, then paused. Can you take the trash out when you're done? My father turned the volume up. Not in anger, just habit. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something, a question, a let me see, anything that matched what I was feeling, but it never came. Later that evening, I overheard her on the phone with a friend, bragging about how Kareem had been chosen to lead his debate team. He's always been so focused, she said. Very practical, a born leader. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at that folder. Not angry, not even surprised. Just smaller than I had been a few hours earlier. That night, I tucked the paper into the back of my closet. I didn't throw it away. But I stopped bringing things like that up. That was the first time I understood that my achievements would only be meaningful to me, that I'd have to clap for myself, light my own candles, be my own audience. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. It was quiet, slow, the way snow builds without anyone noticing until one day you wake up and the road is gone. Over the next few years, I got good at hiding what mattered most. I stopped seeking praise. I told myself I didn't need it. I celebrated wins privately. A good grade, a small freelance gig, and an article I wrote that got published online. The only person who ever asked about my projects was Mr. Yates. He even wrote me a letter of recommendation when I applied for a summer tech program. I got in, one of only 2 girls accepted. I remember standing on the porch holding the acceptance letter, wondering if I should even bother telling my parents. I did, of course. They nodded. My mom warned me not to get too distracted from real career paths. My dad reminded me not to let my studies slip. It wasn't cruelty. That's the hardest part. It was never cruel, just indifference dressed up as guidance, and that's how I learned to protect my light. I began to understand how fragile dreams could be, how they could bend and break under the weight of someone else's doubts. So I became careful, quiet, intentional. By the time I got to college, I knew not to expect check-ins or care packages. I didn't mind. I built a rhythm for myself. Work, classes, late nights with code and YouTube tutorials and cold coffee. I taught myself what no one was willing to teach me: how to back myself, how to create something from nothing. That teenage moment, standing in my kitchen, holding a folder that meant the world to me, never really left. I think about it more than I admit. Not because I'm bitter, but because it was the beginning of everything. The first time I felt the gap between how I saw myself and how they saw me. It planted something deep in me. Not a grudge, not a wound. A seed. The kind of seed that grows slowly in silence. The kind you water when no one's looking. The kind that pushes through cement when the world swears it can't. So when they laughed years later, at a party, over a glass of wine, mocking my ideas like they were silly, they weren't just laughing at a business model or a childhood memory. They were laughing at the girl with the folder, and they still didn't know. That girl had grown roots. I didn't become successful overnight. And truthfully, success wasn't what I was chasing. Not the kind people measure in titles or social media posts anyway. What I wanted was control. Over my time. Over my mind. Over how I showed up in the world. It started slowly. A trickle. of clients through word of mouth, some small website redesigns, consulting on user flow for independent e-commerce brands. I didn't have a blueprint, just a vision and an old laptop with a sticky shift key. But I learned quickly. I taught myself everything I didn't already know, not because I had to prove anything to anyone, but because I finally understood I was the only one who could give myself permission. There were months when I didn't know if the bills would stretch. When I ate the same leftover pasta 3 nights in a row. When I took calls from the bathroom of my shared office space because it was the only quiet place. And there were setbacks, clients ghosting, scopes changing, projects falling through at the last minute. But I kept going. I learned to detach my worth from outcomes. I stopped expecting applause. And strangely, that's when the work started to speak for itself. A Women in Tech newsletter featured one of my UX case studies. A writer from a local startup podcast reached out. Then came a ripple effect I hadn't anticipated. Invites to conferences, LinkedIn messages from other women asking for advice, offers to collaborate. And then, about 2 years after that silent family party, the one where I stood near the punch bowl while they laughed at my umbrella app, I got an email. It was from a Forbes editor. One of my former clients, now scaling fast, had mentioned me in an interview. They were putting together a piece on independent consultants reshaping tech for small businesses. I almost didn't open it. Thought it was spam at first. But there it was. They asked for an interview, a photo, some background. I answered everything honestly. I didn't dress it up. I spoke about the quiet climb, the doubt, and the way being. Underestimated became the soil I grew in. I didn't even tell anyone about it. Not at first. A month later, the article was live. And there, halfway down the page, was my name. My photo. A headline that read, "How this self-taught consultant helped level the playing field for small brands." I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just sat at my desk, staring at the screen, letting the moment pass through me like water. It wasn't validation. It was confirmation. I had become someone they didn't even have a framework for, and now the world knew. The shift was almost immediate. Within a week, I noticed messages in the family group chat. My cousin forwarded the link with the caption, "Is this our Layla?" Suddenly, I had everyone's attention. My aunt called. The one who once told me to have a backup plan. She left a voicemail saying how proud they all were. My mother sent me a long message about how she'd always known I was capable, even if she didn't always know how to show it. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel spiteful. But I'd spent years learning how to validate myself. And now that they wanted to hand it to me like a party favor, I didn't know what to do with it. Eventually, I replied with a short message. "Thanks. I appreciate you reaching out. Hope everyone's doing well." That's all. No bitterness, no sarcasm, just a boundary. In the weeks that followed, the messages kept coming. An invitation to a family dinner. A suggestion that I help Kareem's firm with their user experience. A text from my uncle, the one who'd mocked my early app idea, asking if I'd speak to his friend's daughter who wanted to work in tech. Each time I replied politely, but distantly, like I was speaking through a closed window. And in those exchanges, I finally understood what quiet justice looked like. It wasn't slamming doors or yelling, "I told you so." It wasn't broadcasting my success to prove them wrong. It was knowing that I no longer needed their permission, not to speak, not to take up space, not to belong. One afternoon, my mother called. I let it ring twice before picking up. Her voice was soft, the kind she used when she didn't quite know how to start. "I saw your article," she said. "Your name looked beautiful in print." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Thanks." "I didn't always understand what you were doing," she admitted. "I think I was scared for you." I stayed quiet. But I see it now. I do. There was a long pause. Then she added, almost carefully, "Would you come by this weekend? We're having a few people over." I thought about it. I thought about all the weekends I'd stayed away, quietly licking old wounds. I thought about the girl with the folder, the one who stood in the kitchen waiting to be seen. "No, I don't think so," I said gently. "But I appreciate the invitation." She didn't argue, just said, "Okay, let me know if you change your mind." After I hung up, I sat by the window, watching the breeze move through the leaves outside. It was late afternoon, golden, soft, and I felt light. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just free. That's what quiet justice does. It doesn't roar. It doesn't need an audience. It walks in, sits down at your table, and reminds you that you earned this, not by being louder, but by not leaving. That night, I took a screenshot of the Forbes article. I saved it to a private folder titled "For Me," because that's who I did it for. It's quiet in my apartment most mornings, not the kind of silence that feels empty, the kind that feels chosen. My days begin with a simple routine. A walk. Around the block, a slow cup of coffee and a handwritten note to myself about what matters most that day. Sometimes it's a deadline. Sometimes it's just a reminder to breathe. My company's grown. I now have a small team. 3 brilliant, kind-hearted people who believe in what we're building. We work asynchronously, which means there's no shouting over each other in meetings, no posturing. Just shared goals and mutual respect. Our clients come through referrals now. Steady, thoughtful partnerships. Projects that challenge us but never drain us. I say no more often than I say, "Yes, that used to terrify me. Now it feels like power." I don't think about my family every day anymore, but when I do, I don't feel anger, not even sadness, just space. Like they live in a different country now, familiar, but distant. And that distance doesn't ache the way it used to. For a long time, I thought peace would arrive the same way pain did. All at once, loud and certain. But it didn't. It arrived slowly, quietly. In the way I no longer checked my phone for a reply that wasn't coming. In the way I started wearing the good blouse on a Tuesday, just because I felt like it. I used to measure success in headlines, numbers, proof. Now I measure it in softness, in the ability to walk into a room and not shrink, in the friends who listen, in the fact that I can end my workday at 4 p.m. and not feel guilty. My life feels full now, but not crowded. It's mine. Sometimes I still get the occasional message from a relative. Kareem sent me a link to a webinar he was leading, asked if I could help with his website. I replied kindly but briefly. A few months ago, they added my name back into the family group chat. I muted it, and when someone posted that Forbes article again, this time with a different tone, a different kind of emoji, I didn't respond. I just watched the thread unfold like I was reading someone else's story, because it is someone else's story now, the version of me they once knew. The dreamer, the tech girl, the odd one. She no longer needs to fight. For understanding, she's not waiting for applause. She's not hoping they'll come around. I used to think success would silence their laughter, but real peace didn't come when they stopped laughing. It came when I stopped needing them to. It came when I realized that their validation, their approval, their attention, none of it could build the life I wanted. That the real wealth I had gained wasn't in the contracts or the press features, but in the fact that I had chosen myself. Every day. Over and over again. I had chosen not to shrink, not to bend, not to edit myself for comfort. And now, I live in that choice. I'm not rich because my name showed up on a list. I'm rich because I don't flinch when someone questions me. I'm rich because I trust myself to walk away from things that don't serve me. I'm rich because I know how to sit in a room alone and feel full. And the ones who laughed? They're quieter now, not because they've changed, but because I'm no longer listening.